Hi there everybody, my name is Soul and you're watching the greatest channel on YouTube, and we gotta talk about Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man is my favorite superhero. You know, I grew up on the old Sam Raimi trilogy, and I even rewatched those films and the Amazing Spider-Man films just to prep for No Way Home. You can watch my reviews of those films on my second channel. That being said, let's talk about No Way Home. And this is going to be a spoiler discussion. If you have not seen No Way Home, click off the video, come back, etc. That being said, a lot of people got spoiled. You could probably guess what was going to happen, but you know, we just didn't have that confirmation, you know? And I got spoiled an hour before going to see the movie. I got spoiled by a goddamn YouTube title and thumbnail. This forsaken platform, me being a part of it, is what spoiled me. If I would have just stayed off the internet for another goddamn hour. That being said, you can probably guess what happens. Toby Maguire, Andrew Garfield, they're actually a big part of the movie. They're like halfway through the film introduced, and they might as well be like really big supporting characters. On top of that, you have all the other villains. It's a whole Spider-Man smorgasbord. And all the nostalgia, everything that this film could have been, it was, for the most part. I have a couple complaints about this film that we're going to go into. I have like 2 pages worth of notes that we're going to go through. And yeah, it's going to be a fun time. I want to start talking about the beginning of the film where we kick off where Far From Home left off, where everyone knows who Spider-Man is. It's weird to think that in Spider-Man's world, like, all that shit that happened with Mysterio was, like, a couple days ago during the events of this film. Like, he's having a wild week, man. A wild week. That being said, yeah, everyone knows he's Spider-Man, and we immediately get the ramifications for that. And people act probably how they would in real life. It's creepy, it's not healthy, and people fucking suck. So, because people suck, the whole world has to be endangered because Spider-Man has to go up to see Doctor Strange. And Doctor Strange has a weird role in this movie. He's a big part of the marketing. He's all over the trailer, but really he takes a back seat like right after the first act, if he even makes it through the first act. Basically, they use him for mumbo-jumbo space magic powers, and that's his big role in the film. And it's a little disheartening that is kind of like his place in the MCU. Whenever we need magic stuff to happen, he's the magic guy. He can create spells, so obviously he's going to be our main man for this film, but it is what it is. Once they finally explained how the spell worked, everything kind of clicked into place, because before I was really wondering how they're going to get all these characters in here, and the way the spell works, it's just everyone who knew Peter Parker is Spider-Man gets in. I thought it was like actual universes were going to collide and shit. No. It's just people who happen to know Peter Parker was Spider-Man in a handful of universes, let's assume, are now in Tom Holland's universe. And I guess we're going to ignore that, you know, we got a couple Harry Osborn, we got a Mary Jane, we got a Gwen Stacy walking around somewhere. We're just going to ignore all that. We got a Venom walking around somewhere in this film, but we're going to ignore all that, I guess. But before I go into the villains and all the other characters, I'm just going to quickly talk about Doctor Strange, because he had a really actually cool fight scene where we go into his little geometry world, and Spider-Man beats him with geometry. And I'm not going to lie, it was still pretty hype. I bought it. I think it was a little dumb how Doctor Strange gets back in the film. Like, he's just taking a backseat for a real long time because his magic item gets taken away. His MacGuffin gets pulled from him, and suddenly Ned has Doctor Strange powers. What a weird MacGuffin. That being said, though, Doctor Strange and Spider-Man flying around in an Inception world, and that's like that's not even the first act of the film. Hell yeah, that's awesome. Before we go into the villains and everybody else, I want to talk about MJ, Michelle Jones, and Ned, because Michelle Jones, I think, finally has like come into the Mary Jane role. She finally feels like Mary Jane, because the first film, she's an Easter egg, and the second film, like, she was like a fun romance. Like, that's the film that really like introduced her as the central romance, but like she just kind of knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, which is a little weird. And we don't know that much about her compared to like the first Mary Jane, where we get a backstory with her. She has motivation. She's constantly being brought up. I didn't expect this film to do all that, but this film actually made her feel like her and Peter, they weren't just two high school kids who had crushes on each other. This felt like a real romance, and there was actual stakes, and you actually care about them going to college together. It's still like just another romance. It's not like exceptional, but considering that now it's almost revealed like, hey, this is like a Spider-Man origin story. The first 3 Spider-Man movies might as well just be Spider-Man's origin story. And now that like, oh, Mary Jane has been set up to become Mary Jane, it makes a lot more sense. And it feels like a lot of this film just corrected a lot of the things I didn't like about the previous Spider-Man films. A lot of like the stuff they were doing with the villains or with Tom Holland, him just having like the Tony Stark suits, all of that is not really a problem anymore. And then we got Ned, who, you know, he's constantly just used for the comedy, and he's still bringing it. But again, he has heart. You still care about him getting into college, and, you know, there has to be an emotional anchor for Spider-Man, and it's really Zendaya and Ned. And considering we've had 3+ films with these guys now, it feels like you actually care about them enough to like really get behind them when we need that anchor to be there. And the fact that he gets Doctor Strange powers is so unearned and so kind of dumb, but it's one of those things in MCU movies that like they just kind of speed run past it and you just kind of go with it. Now I want to talk about each of the villains, starting with probably the one I was most hyped to see, Dr. Octavius. Doc Ock, Spider-Man 2, peak Spider-Man content for me, man. And I was a little concerned that they weren't going to do him justice. I remember just seeing the trailer, I was like, he got older, like, is this supposed to be like an older Doc Ock? And no, this is the Doc Ock, like, straight from when he was about to die, and I guess he just aged a bunch of years in those couple of seconds. That's one of the, almost the main complaints I have with this film, is like the inconsistencies with the previous movies, but what can you do? I know it's a little hard, but Doc Ock gets into a fight with Spider-Man pretty early on in the film, and it's awesome, man. I think he's defeated rather easily, but that's kind of to be expected. Once they start putting the characters actually in this universe, you actually kind of see that they're grounded in this world's reality, and like, oh yeah, I forgot that the characters in the MCU are like all overpowered in comparison to like Sam Raimi Spider-Man characters. Oh yeah, Stark technology versus Dr. Octavius is not that good of a matchup, because Spider-Man just hacks his way around Doc Ock, and sure enough, eventually we see the real Doc Ock, and he comes to, and it feels like he finally gets that redemption. We see it at the end of Spider-Man 2, but it was so quick. Like, no, we got to see Doc Ock like finally see the light in his eyes. He's a hero just for a little bit, and there's a reunion moment with Peter. And that was so rewarding, especially since I just saw the movie and they call back to it. Just them smiling at each other was one of my favorite moments in the film. Yeah, Doc Ock, sure, he got beat up pretty easily, but like I have no complaints with how they handled Doc Ock. He definitely was treated like one of, if not the most important characters in the film. The Lizard Man, not the most important character of the film. And again, rewatching all the movies, the Lizard Man is the worst villain. He's just the worst villain. They set him up okay at the beginning, but like he just becomes big dumb lizard that we gotta defeat, and his backstory becomes obsolete. And even in this film, like I just watched Amazing Spider-Man, and I could not tell you if he died or what happened with him. And it's like, oh, he went to jail. So the stakes for him just don't feel important. It's like, oh, he's not even gonna die. He's just gonna go back to jail. And he gets maybe 0 like good moments. He's just really another bad guy in the background, and they make lizard jokes. They already cured him once before, so it's not a big deal. Like, Lizard Man got shafted, but even in his own movie he did, so it is what it is. Sandman, who has the weirdest motivation of all, because in the original Spider-Man 3, he lived. So we don't know. And this goes for all the good guys who ended up living. They just kind of go on, and we don't know what part of the timeline that they were pulled from, because when you're dealing with multidimensional travel, especially multidimensional travel that's pulling people from different moments in time, wouldn't it just fast forward to whatever time Sandman and Toby and all these guys would have died? Like, it's a weird rule that, like, oh, it's right before you die at different points in the timeline, but some people are just alive. So Sandman, if he goes back, is just going to be fine. So the whole movie, he's just trying to get the box. He's just trying to go home. He's trying to see his daughter. And it's weird. Another one of my main complaints of the film is that they very easily cure everybody. I don't know how within like an hour you cure Sandman's disease. In Spider-Man 3, that wasn't even like that wasn't even considered. Spider-Man 3, like, that was not gonna happen. Even after the film, as he goes off into the sunset, we just assume he's going to stay like that forever. And even if he goes back now, it's weird, man. Did he even want to be changed? We would assume so, but it's a weird thing that they did with Sandman. In all honesty, like, I don't even know if they should have had him. And Flint Marko, I assumed that they just couldn't get the actor for him because he was just a big sand guy the whole movie, which more closer to comic books or whatever. But at the end of the film, I was like, oh, they did get the actor. I was like, I thought this was just like a really good impression. No, they got him. They got the guy. So, like, what was the deal with him being sand the whole movie? Isn't that just more shit you gotta edit? But, Sandman and Lizard Man were like the backup beef that didn't need to be there. After that, we had Electro. Electro actually got a pretty good amount of screen time, considering that his movie sucked in comparison to the others. His powers are a little interesting because when we first see him, he's just the big blue electric guy, like he always is. But then he's talking about, oh, this universe has new energy and stuff like that. And that kind of makes sense. Like, oh, this world just has different energy. Makes sense, I guess. We completely forget his backstory in Amazing Spider-Man, though, because at first he's just the nerdy guy with the gap teeth and the thing, and he's obsessed with Spider-Man. And we're supposed to believe in his timeline that was like a day or two ago. But now he's like a really cool guy. He's funny. He's just making jokes like, oh man, I wish there was a black Peter Parker out there, a black Spider-Man. And like, not that that's a bad line, but it's like, where did this attitude come from? And even when he turns back, it was dumb in the original movie, but when he turned to Electro, his teeth, they went together. And when he goes back now, his teeth aren't like apart. He doesn't look like the same nerd as before. Like, he got a makeover and he looks completely different, and that doesn't make sense. And the same thing with Doc Ock. Little inconsistencies. It is what it is, though. But they gave him a decent amount of screen time, and they did the whole electric mask thing as a callback to his original self. A lot of how they use these characters, bringing them to their more comic book selves. We'll get to that when we talk about Green Goblin. That's all awesome, man. I liked all that, especially Green Goblin. But before, we can talk about Green Goblin, actually. First off, they don't need the mask. They immediately get rid of the mask. And storyline wise, it's weird. Like, oh, right after that conversation with Peter, like Norman Osborn resurfaces and destroys the mask. That's a little weird. After that, though, Green Goblin, the best character, the best villain, at least in this film. He is the MVP. He feels like the ultimate villain. He's getting the royal red carpet treatment. And I love it, man. I think that was probably the best decision they could have made, because he gets to kill Aunt May. And that is like the hardest part of this film. And it actually feels like Tom Holland's Spider-Man is actually like coming full circle. He is becoming the Spider-Man. He finally has that like closure that all the Spider-Mans get, where he has to realize great power comes great responsibility, just as the other Spider-Man Uncle Ben's had said, or at least one of them said, and one of them kind of said it. And yeah, I love the fight scenes with Green Goblin, man, where they're like power bombing each other and shit, and there is weight to those punches. It didn't just feel like a big CGI fest, which a lot of the Marvel films slip into. And yeah, it is, don't get me wrong, but they have some like actual fisticuffs in there too, especially with Green Goblin. And it's with Willem Dafoe, whose face is perfect. You hate Green Goblin in this film. He is an asshole. And then whenever he's like a chicken shit heel, and he's not super incredibly evil, he is like the sympathetic, like crazy man. He's like, what's going on? And I think Willem Dafoe kind of played up the scared Norman Osborn a little much, but like considering the state that Norman's in, like now that he is completely lost to the Goblin, like we didn't really get to see that much in the original film because he's just Green Goblin. But like if Norman did resurface, also in an alternate universe, you'd probably be fucking psychotic and crazy and everything that he is in this film. So no complaints with Green Goblin. He was perfect. I loved him, man. He was great. And again, the Aunt May thing, because I'm only going to talk about that here. God, I like that it wasn't just like kind of like how they killed Gwen Stacy or even how they killed Uncle Ben. Like she's, you know that she's about to die, but like she's like dying in a more kind of realistic way where she's like, oh, I'm good, and then she's not, and she's still like trying to, you know, care for Peter and like be his mom figure. And it's really sad. It's really sad. And yeah, you cared about Aunt May. You fully did, because we had so many movies with her. And it's crazy how Marvel movies can have like these storylines and these characters that are building in the background. And when we get to the big movies, that's when they can have the moment that, oh, it turns out in the end, they were just using Aunt May. Like that was another thing. I never really knew how to feel about like hot young Aunt May until like, oh, like she was just gonna die. Yeah, and once again, everything comes full circle. It makes me feel better about the previous movies. Anyway, after that, let's just talk about the boys, Peter and Andrew. Oh my God, man. That's what I was spoiled about. I knew at least Toby was going to be in the movie. And as soon as Ned did that little thing and you saw Spider-Man, you were like you could feel the tension in the movie theater. And then he just pops out, unmasked. He's like, what's going on? And Andrew Garfield, honestly, at least as far as the good guys, he kind of stole the show. Because in the first Amazing Spider-Man, where he's like half hungover and just kind of like he's really awkward, and I really feel like those films never, like those films had good ingredients, but the recipe just got fucked. But Andrew Garfield really had potential as Spider-Man. There's a lot of parts I liked about him being Spider-Man, and I felt like we really got to see that in this film, where he's actually funny, he's charismatic. And he's still a fucking nerd at the end. He's like a cool nerd though. And this film like kind of illustrated that the best. He's kind of like the it's like watching three brothers, and he's like the cool skater one. I think they finally did him justice, and we can talk about this now. Gwen Stacy obviously died in Amazing Spider-Man 2. And they talk about that in this film. And they even come back to it, because when Mary Jane is falling, even when we see in the trailer, Tom Holland Spider-Man can't get to her in time, and Andrew Garfield has to save her. And it's this really cathartic moment. It's this really, really nice little scene where he's just so happy he caught her. And he says, "Are you all right?" And then like he starts to cry, and she says, "Are you all right?" And he's just like, "Yeah." And that, again, because the Spider-Man films both felt like they were going to get sequels. It felt like there was going to be a Spider-Man 4, especially with how they ended it. Just like Mary Jane and Peter are kind of back together, but not. The villains are still kind of up in the air. There was a lot you could still do with that story, and it felt like they were leaving it open. And Amazing Spider-Man 2 was purposely trying to set up for a sequel that never came. So the fact that we kind of had closure for something that ultimately we never did get. We knew that he became Spider-Man again and like got back on the horse, but we never really like got to pick his brain about it. We never like really got to hear him talk about it or do anything with that. It was just, oh, I became Spider-Man again, and like it felt like a big part of that movie like never really got resolved, because Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy was like the best part of those films, and then she just dies and then it immediately ends. Now that we can actually get more time to hear him talk about it.
A few moments later.
I just realized my camera wasn't filming for a good portion of that, so sorry about that. I'm not refilming it. Anyway, yeah, Andrew Garfield, he's great. Actually getting that closure with him catching Mary Jane, that was like, I know that the Sony is the main people behind the film, but you know, the fact that we're in the MCU and getting like closure for shit that happened in the Amazing Spider-Man, which was filming during like phase 2. Is Amazing Spider-Man a phase 2 Marvel film now? Ugh, shit's crazy. Anyway, Toby Maguire. I had seen like pictures online of this like bearded Toby that I was like, and then that's not what he was at all. It was they were trying to capture that Toby, the original Toby, as much as they could, you know, with the youth pastor look. And he's still kind of awkward. You know, he's definitely more like cleaned up, and he still just doesn't fully feel like the original Spider-Man, but it's not written by the same like team. It's not like the kind of corny comic book movie anymore. It's the MCU. It's as much an MCU Toby Maguire could be that original version, and I will happily accept that. And we don't. That's the worst thing about this film. Is I like the fact that we're still in just Tom Holland's movie, but once these other two are introduced and we're like cleaning up like a lot of the damage done by the bad Spider-Man films, it really feels like, man, we could just pick up right where we left off. Give me more Toby, give me more Andrew, and they're supporting characters. But damn, do I just want to see Toby and Andrew get more movies and just do more with them, because I was just so happy to see Toby as Spider-Man again. Him just having the suit underneath, talking about his past experiences, which that would be something I talk about with the writing, which was kind of bad. There is some like weird bad dialogue between some of the guys, but it's still great to see Toby, man. It was probably my favorite part of the film, in all honesty, because he had great moments with Tom Holland Spider-Man. He had great moments with Doc Ock, him and Green Goblin in some aspects. You know, it felt like there was more drama and more like actual real like tension between Tom Holland and Green Goblin versus Toby and Green Goblin. And in all honesty, as much as like Norman's death really rippled throughout that entire franchise, it still felt like Tom Holland was like, that's my villain now, especially by the end of the film. That's what I thought of the boys being back in the film, man. Whether they're gonna show, I feel like we're gonna see them again. It's just what capacity, and I desperately want to know. After that, we get the resolution with Tom telling Doctor Strange, wipe me from existence as Peter Parker. He tries to see Zendaya, and they didn't like do some bullshit where it's like, oh, I remember you now, and it was no, she doesn't remember him. And he is so lost in that scene that he just leaves, and that is some real shit. I love that scene. They didn't do an ass pull. He just has to do the Spider-Man thing, which is just bow his head down and do what was right and just walk out for that moment. Maybe they'll get back together. We'll see. Who knows? Obviously, everyone remembers Spider-Man, but not Peter Parker. So I guess all the Avengers, like, it's just all they remember is Spider-Man flinging around with his mask on, and we don't know who that is. Iron Man's dead, so he doesn't remember. He doesn't need to remember. And really, I think that's the only like big like world-affecting change. I know it's gonna be weird, and because even when they alluded to the Doctor Strange sequel, now they're gonna be like, you tampered with the timeline, even though you don't exactly remember how you did. Yeah, I guess we'll find out whenever that film comes around in a couple months. They're just pumping out MCU movies right now. But it's gonna be really interesting to see how this affects the timelines, because now I assume there's gonna be alternate universes. There's gonna be a timeline where Green Goblin dies, and then one where he survives, and Green Goblin lives. Doc Ock, I'm pretty sure, dies no matter what, though. Because depending what moment he jumped, because I guess he could have jumped like right as he was going down into the sun thing, and then like the arms took his mind back over. Or it could have been like right before when he was, oh my god, it's so confusing. But point is, Doc Ock's still gonna die because someone's got to go down there and fix that shit. Sandman, who cares? Lizard Man, who cares? Electro will live and just be a random guy sitting there with no electric powers, so not a big deal there. But really, if Norman lives, there's going to be a timeline where he lives and then Doc Ock dies, and there might be a timeline where they both live if Doc Ock manages to survive. So we got like timelines on top of timelines now. And something that we didn't talk about, again, Mary Jane Gwen Stacy should also be somewhere around the city. And Gwen Stacy must have got transported like to this city right before she died. And then she's just going to get sent back just like, oh my god, that is tragic. That's probably why they didn't even bring her up, because it was like, that's just going to be so fucking tragic. And yeah, and potentially Aunt May, if she knew or didn't know, is technically not confirmed, but I'm pretty sure she knew, so she would have been wandering around somewhere. Where they got transported to, like, do you get transported to the same spot in that universe, or is it just random? Because they're all around the same, like, at least state. Is it just somewhere in New York? There's a lot of shit that I think they could have fleshed out. Like, this film really should have been 4 or 5 hours. It should have been a 5-hour film. We can do all the Toby stuff, all the Andrew stuff, all the villain stuff. We can make everything else kind of make sense and wrap it up with a neat bow. And I know that there's supposedly alternate endings to the film, which really makes sense because it really felt like they were about to kill Toby. It felt like they were it felt like that was like in the original script, and then he was just fine. That was a little bit weird. And again, I felt like they might have backed out of that because maybe they want more Toby movies. Toby's old, but he's just as old as a lot of the Avengers, so they could do more Toby movies, which would be wild, but I would love to see it. So yeah, it's interesting to see where they go with all the Spider-Man lore and all the timelines. I don't necessarily want like 10 different MCU timelines, but that's potentially something that could happen, and they want to keep the movies coming, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to talk about a couple things I don't like. The writing is sometimes just bad. It's not necessarily bad, but it, I think, makes the scenes worse, because there is a lot of serious moments where they cut to a joke, and there's a lot of moments where like all you have is like a dumb joke, and it's bad MCU jokes. And a lot of MCU films, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Like if I'm watching Eternals or something, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. But when you have something that I really care about with all these characters, like, and that dialogue is somewhat precious, and you waste it on just a joke, like a not very good joke. Some of the jokes I like, don't get me wrong, like them asking about the white sticky, asking about how Toby makes the webs. I thought that discussion was interesting and reflective. I like when Toby's giving Andrew like the pep talk, like, you're great. You say it, you're great. I like that stuff, man. But the Scooby-Doo shit, them laughing about Doc Ock's name, that's the stuff I don't really like. Also, I don't know how to feel about the after credits scene because they introduced Venom, which we knew Venom might be in this film because we saw the Venom 2 after credits scene. Yeah, Venom, against all logic, is somehow in this universe. When the spell was only supposed to do people who knew Peter Parker. And this Venom doesn't even know who that is. So he should not be there. There's no reason he should be there. And when he gets changed back, this little piece of the symbiote is still there. So we broke logic twice, because why would the spell leave this tiny little piece of him? That doesn't make any sense. We broke logic twice for Venom. And I think that little symbiote piece, maybe it'll be like one of those things where Venom infects everybody. It might be like one of those Venom affects all the other MCU characters, or maybe it'll just be Black Spider-Man with Tom Holland. There's a lot of things that they could do with that. And I'm open to those, but like I don't like how we got there. And I'm happy that it's not going to be Tom Holland Venom in the Marvel universe, because the MCU, I should say, because I don't think I want to see that. I'm just not really interested in that version of Venom enough to warrant that, and I just want the normal Venom. I want bad guy Venom. Then the other after credits scene, the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. Yeah, that was fine. I'm excited for that film. That's not something we really need to talk about this film. We can just focus on the Spider-Man stuff, but overall, this film was spectacular. Not only did we get the reunions, we got to see Toby Maguire and Andrew Garfield, we got all the villains, and all of them were on their A game. Obviously, we couldn't do everything. No one cares enough about Lizard Man and Sandman to really give them the best treatment possible, but I was still hype. A lot of the things that happened in this movie were incredibly hype. There was still moments of like really sad shit, and there was some decent comedy and some bad comedy. But for the most part, as a Spider-Man fan, a person who's really loved the Sam Raimi films, and there are a lot of things I do like about the Andrew Garfield films, and those are the things we got to see again in this film. I loved it all, man. I think Spider-Man No Way Home is one of the best MCU movies. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. And yeah, it's my favorite film of the year. I did another video where I looked through the old Spider-Man movies and looked at reviews for those films and saw the fans' reception of those films. So go and watch those whenever you can. That being said, Spider-Man No Way Home, what are your thoughts? Let me know. I'll see you in the next one. And with that, I leave you.